to bring up Dr. Margaret Sather. She was actually my humanities professor when I was a sophomore at Christian Brothers. And she encouraged me years ago. She said, Bart, you ought to take your sermons and you ought to put them in book form so that they can continue to live and so forth. Well, that was years ago, but I'm so thankful because it was that spark, that vision that have really helped to start taking these sermons and putting them in book form. So for those who remember, a few years back, we were walking through a series and we preached a sermon outside the box and preached from inside of a box, something like this, and then I kicked it out at the end. And so that became really the basis of the book, that we're living in such a time now where people have to start thinking creatively in terms of what it is that we need to do.
One thing about you, Reverend Dr. Bartholomew Orr, you are one that thinks outside of the box. Especially, you mentioned in the preface, I believe, the viral moment of you flying into church.
Right.
It went viral.
And here's a wonderful thing. Sometimes I don't even plan the outside the box moments, but God just supernaturally intervenes and make things work for His glory. So that's the beauty of it all, because that was something that, my goodness, it wasn't until that Saturday morning that we were like, okay, we might be able to do this, and look what happened as a result of it.
Yeah, it went viral, y'all. He broke the internet, y'all. Broke social media. March 15th, you mentioned that in the introduction. March 15th. What was in your mind? Obviously, you were getting phone calls after phone call. You were getting, Pastor Orr, what we gonna do? What we gonna do?
Well, Brown, I mean, y'all know we just don't close church for anything. And so, you know, hey, I was going to be one of those bold preachers that push on through even this pandemic, because nothing is going to close the doors of Brown. And yet we had the government, we had all of the medical, and it really, Dr. Eric Blakeney, after that 8 o'clock service, was like, hey, Pastor, no, we can't do this. We can't continue it. And I'm thankful that at that moment, it was about listening to the medical advisor, because God will put people around you to speak into your life. And sometimes you got to be willing to listen, even when something is when you can't see it at first.
And you that's a great segue to chapter 1, fake news. As a pastor, as a innovative leader, you had to navigate the thousands of congregants here at Brown Missionary Baptist Church, and then you're a leader. A lot of other pastors look up to see what Reverend Dr. Orr is doing. You had to navigate your way in these congregants through fake news, knowing what to hear, and you bring it back into Scripture. Even Jesus had some fake news around him.
I mean, you know, and it's so sad. Last week I preached "Stop Lying," and if you think about it, we live in this culture of just lies now, where we really have to, with the aid of the Holy Spirit, be discerning about everything and everyone that we listen to, and you know, and so it abounds. It abounds, and yet we need to, because that's a part of, if you're going to really be creative, you got to make sure that you're acting upon good, solid source.
A great point to that. Collaboration and partnership are often key to achieving effective change. In what ways do you encourage churches to collaborate with other organizations or ministries to amplify their impact? Because you got to know who to be around.
You know, I just mentioned this week, and Brown, you all are still being impactful. Game Changers. Brown is still doing that, and I think now we're going on, what, 3 years into that. And the whole point of Game Changers is this right here. We cannot do it all by ourselves as a church. So how do we go out in the community? How do we look for people that are doing some creative things in the community? Mechanics that are fixing the cars of single mothers that otherwise wouldn't be able to get back and forth to work. And so how do we partner with all of these other in the community to make a difference and a lasting change? And so that's the collaboration that we encourage all churches and organizations to do.
I believe it's chapter 2, you talk about maturity. So in relation to maturity, how can individual leaders and churches develop and cultivate a sense of maturity that will guide their trajectory in building God's kingdom?
Well, when it comes to maturity, there's an old quote that says a growing church is led by growing pastors. The classroom, I believe, is the only room that we never grow out of. There's always room for improvement for each one of us. So how do we continue to grow? How do we continue to expand our minds? How do we continue to gather information? And here's the wonderful thing, Brown. I'm blessed to pastor the most innovative, inspiring members. Y'all just don't realize how you all pour into my life. When I think about Gertrude Bridgeforth was learning the internet and learning social media into her 80s and 90s, you know, and we just, oh my goodness, last year she hit, 100, and we just funeralized her. But she was always still going, still pushing, still being active. And it's that kind of growing and maturity. The moment we think I've arrived, I can't learn anymore, I believe that's when we begin to die.
Let me ask you, how important was it for us to mature throughout this pandemic? I think this was a season for us to really look at ourselves and really get to know ourselves and hopefully, as you said, grow ourselves.
Oh my goodness. And I think a lot of folks probably didn't take full advantage of the time at home in order to grow. I mean, because of the fact that when the pandemic was over with, y'all, oftentimes it went right back to business as usual. Instead of taking some of those principles that we learned in the midst of the pandemic, one of the things the pandemic taught us is what we could do without. You know, at least it should have taught us what was really valuable, what's really important, what we really need. And some of these other things, okay, they're taking up our energy, but they might not be really benefiting us to that great of a degree. And so the pandemic was a great opportunity, even as a church, to see how do we do ministry even better for the glory of God. How do you do it when folks are not coming into worship? You know, how do we do worship? My goodness, we've been looking at a screen now for what, 3 years? And how do you do it effectively?
That's a long time.
Yeah.
3 years. And even talking about through a pandemic growing, hopefully a lot of us developed or connected with some type of mentor. And in your book, mentorship is mentioned. As a matter of fact, mentoring is another area of focus in your book. Can you discuss the significance of mentoring and how it contributes to the overall success of a church and its leaders?
You know, John Maxwell says that success without a successor is failure. So every last one of us ought to be mentoring someone else. We ought to be in the business of giving our job away, teaching someone, training someone else, because you never know how you're going to be impacting that individual literally for life. And so mentoring is so important, poured into the life of others. My goodness, math was my favorite subject in school. And I'm blessed today to have my pre-algebra teacher here, Miss Jones. Oh my goodness. And and y'all, and I don't know if you still remember this, but I had advanced so in math until it was like, what was I? I was junior high, but I was ready to take some high school courses, and how do I continue to grow in order to get those even at a younger age? And I appreciate, great leaders like Miss Jones that really opened the door for me to take those advanced classes even when I was still in the younger grade. To the point where by the time I graduated, they were adding math courses just so that we can continue to be able to matriculate. So mentoring, so thank you for mentoring me, because a lot of times, and this is the other side of mentoring, those black teachers, sometimes I wasn't the best student. And so mentoring took on correcting me to say, okay, hey, this is what you need to do in order to make it.
That's how it usually works too, because
Yes.
if you're not always, I had a lot of mentors, and I advanced in PE. I was an advanced PE student, so thank you for helping Dr. Orr matriculate through the math. Math wasn't my ministry at all, but thank God for PE. So, and those of you who haven't picked up your copy of Outside the Box, I wanted to tell you, even though I'm in chapter 3 right now, it's a book that challenges you. And, as a pastor, what challenges do you foresee in implementing the innovative changes you propose in this book right here? How can these challenges be overcome?
Brown, we're at a unique opportunity. We're faced with so much that's happening in our world today. And I don't know about y'all, but it is still disheartening. Just this past week, we saw the tragic death of a 4-year-old. We see the unemployment, and not just unemployment, but underemployment in the sense of people just not wanting to work, businesses. And so when I drive through our neighborhoods and begin to see rundown, dilapidated, what can we do at this season to really bring about a turnaround in our community? How can we as churches win more people to Christ? How can we be more impactful? I want to pass on generational wealth. And so how do we even build and build up a next generation when it comes to financial literacy? I was oh my goodness, someone was telling me that in the 60s, the percentage of home ownerships for African Americans, I think were around 40 or 42%. I might be off on the numbers, y'all. And they said today, those percentages are still the same. In other words, as African Americans, everyone else have progressed, but even when it comes to home ownership, we have not progressed. We don't own our own homes. We're not passing on generational wealth even to the next generation. So these are the challenges that I believe that are facing us, the spiritual challenges, economic challenges, just the moral challenges that are facing us. And so as a church, what do we need to do to think outside the box? How do we make sure that we are financially sound? But how do we make sure also that we have the skilled, trained individuals to make this happen?
Now, you've been all over with this book. I've been I pay attention to Pastor Orr's social media because when he had that 30 days of giving during Christmas time, I was just hoping he came to Fox 13 with a check, even though Channel 3 was doing it. But I will say this: Brown is not a dying church; it is a thriving church. And we get to this, what advice would you give to pastors and church leaders who may feel resistant or hesitant to step outside the box and embrace change in their ministry?
Oh my goodness. Look, at this point, we either change or die. We either change or die. In ministry, most times, most ministries, you're going to go up, hit a plateau, and then there's a decline. So even Brown, as thriving as we are, how do we continue to do this without plateauing and declining? And it's almost like, brothers and sisters, every so many years, we need to cast a vision out 5, 7, 10, 20 years. And that's what we're doing now. I don't plan on being here 20 more years, but I want to go ahead and cast vision out. I want to be retired in 20 years. But I want to go ahead and cast vision out as to where we're going to be. What are we going to be involved in? How are we still going to be impactful and transformational even 20, 30, 40 years from now?
And I believe there are so many churches here in the Mid-South, Brown being one of them, who accepts change very much so, and the congregants do as well. We can see that every Saturday, every Sunday. And
Thank y'all, Brown. Thank y'all for embracing change with me.
But what are some common misconceptions or barriers that prevent churches from thinking and acting outside the box? How can these barriers be overcome?
Well, and I think Carter in his book does an excellent job of saying why it is that you have successful companies that fail. And sometimes one of the things is that the stick is allowed to remain on the other side of the ball. In other words, sometimes there are stubborn organizations, individuals, or ideals that we allow to stay in place instead of challenging those to move them out the way. Complacency. Are we comfortable? And sometimes things can be going so well until you become comfortable, and complacency will allow you to plateau and decline. So we have to always, even in the midst of our success, and here at Brown, we have 4 S's that we say that we need to guard ourselves against. Of course, slander, scandal, strife, but that 4th S is success. Because if we're not careful, we'll feel like I've arrived, I can be comfortable and ride on out. And yet, that's not what the Lord is calling us to do.
Yeah, because I believe the pandemic actually allowed us to feel comfortable. And some of us got lazy. I admit, I got lazy. And I saw, before you got in here, Pastor Orr, I mentioned that a lot of churches got lazy.
Oh, yes. Preachers got lazy. I got lazy. I got out the habit of visiting the sick. And, it was something for a couple of years. You didn't even have to go to a hospital. You didn't have to go back into a home. And it was like, it's not a lot of running to do. And you can get lazy. And so, hey, that's why, again, how do you continue to know that there's work to do and you can't throw in the towel yet?
Yeah. But I think what this pandemic also did, and throughout this pandemic and moving forward, it really molded a lot of people to become individual leaders. And what your book emphasizes the importance of individual leaders and entire churches. Could you provide some practical steps or guidance for leaders and congregations to implement the principles you present in outside the box?
Well, I think we have to, one, come together. Come together. A lot of people now are doing vision boarding, vision casting, coming together with other like-minded leaders to talk about the issues, to talk about the problems. There's something when you just collaborate and come together. But then, what are the problems? Identifying, assessing where the areas are, and then coming up with creative plans to tackle each one of those issues. And it's just a strategy to say that, hey, we've been called not only just to identify what's wrong, but to be a part of the problem solving.
And, Brown, y'all have a culture here. Sherry and I were just mentioning, this is the only Baptist church I know that shout the way y'all do.
That shout?
Shout.
Oh, shout.
Shout.
No,
shout. Maybe
what?
it was my
Hey.
New Orleans accent, but I wore my soft sole shoes because I didn't know. I know it's a book launch, but I didn't know.
I Thursday night, I had the opportunity of preaching at Pentecostal Temple. And
You wore some tennis shoes.
Well, I wore some comfortable shoes. I did wear comfortable shoes, but it was something because I think we didn't get out of there till after 10 o'clock. And I told them afterwards, I said, now I thought Brown shouted. I said, but when I came over here tonight,
You needed a Gatorade.
we just doing yoga at Brown. Yeah. I said, our shout is yoga compared to...
You needed a Pedialyte after. But that brings me to the next question. How can churches create a culture of continuous learning and growth, allowing them to adapt to new challenges and seize opportunities for innovation?
Well, one of the things that I've shared with pastors for years is when it comes to worship, because a lot of times people ask, what are the winning combination for Brown? What's been the key to the success of Brown? And I call them 5 W's: worship, witnessing, working, and then the word, and then just having that warm family atmosphere. But when it comes to worshiping, how do we make worship both informative but also inspirational? So you want to come and really be fed, feed your soul, your spirit, but also how do we come to really stretch our minds as well? And so that's what I would encourage preachers and churches, that the shout is great, but a burning with no learning will eventually burn out. And so you need to make sure that you have both of that and continue to challenge the people in so many ways.
That's the truth, y'all. A burn with no learn will burn out. That's how I felt in the math classes. A burn with no learn will burn out. Now, finally, what do you hope readers will take away from Outside the Box, and what impact do you envision it having on churches and their ministries?
You know what, and Brown, and again, and it's always amazing what God does, but he's already opening doors for us to really speak into the lives of other pastors and other churches. I was just last week at a pastors conference in New Orleans, and have a Cameroon trip coming up, a South Africa trip coming up in December. And as we, matter of fact, I was just on, over the last few months, on a Zoom call with pastors from Swaziland, and really walking through a lot of the basis of the book in terms of how can that local church really be impactful, and what are the hats that pastors wear, what are the problems that we are facing, and how do we overcome that? So I'm hoping that as pastors and churches and leaders really get this book, we can really begin to think outside the box, and how do we be transformational in our community? We need to outperform the world. And we're in June, and I'm gonna use this because we're in this month. But y'all think about Pride Month and think of how it consumes everything that you're seeing right now. That has happened because media marketing agencies have been thinking outside the box. And they have figured out how to put rainbows on everything in order to drive their message home. And so as a church, we have to just make sure that we are working harder than the world. There is one parable in the Bible where Jesus actually talks about a dishonest servant. And Jesus says to his believers, we need to learn from these dishonest folks how we need to do things just a little bit better to be impactful. He knew he was getting ready to get fired, and he said, I'm too old to go get another job, and I don't want to lose all my money. And so he began to make a bunch of friends by saying, hey, you owe 100, give me 50 and I'll clear your debt. So that when that next season come, he's got favor from a whole bunch of folks. He was dishonest, but Jesus said he was thinking outside the box. Are we thinking likewise in terms of how do we overcome these challenges and be impactful?
And one last thing, this book not only teaches to the church inside the church, but it talks to the church outside the building, because you can use a lot of these steps, these messages inside of this book on your everyday life. You need mentoring.
Right.
You need to navigate your way through the falsehoods or whatnot. How can you encourage those who are not in Brown or in this Mid-South area to go about their everyday life, going to work,
Right.
knowing or having that discernment to just keep or tell God, be a fence?
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping that even secular leaders and even in our businesses, again, I think God is calling us to excel in all areas. And so even if you're a business owner, how do you be innovative in your business? How do you expand it? How do you grow it? How do you make sure that you don't become so complacent until you allow change all around you and you miss out on the opportunities? We think about Ubers and we think about Lyfts. We think about FedEx, who's celebrating 50 years here. These are companies where somebody was thinking outside the box. They started with an ideal, with a problem, with a way to solve it, and then they stuck with it, and they're able now to see the fruit of their labor in the millions and billions. But it all started with somebody thinking outside the box. And I believe so as it relates to even businesses, even with our health. How do we think outside the box? Do we keep on doing the same old thing? If we're not feeling like we want to feel, are we going to keep doing the same thing, or are we going to get creative? If those stubborn pounds that won't come off, are you going to be creative about it, or just, So if we start really applying this, thinking outside the box, being willing to work beyond and outside the box, I believe it can help in every aspect of our lives.
Child, I need to start thinking outside the box because I've been trying to get these 7 pounds off of me the last 2 weeks. And look, what do you say to the people who say, and we all hear it all the time, if it ain't broke, don't fix it? What do you say to that individual who is just, it's good?
Yeah, um, oh my goodness. Look, goes back to complacency. It's so easy, y'all, for all of us to become comfortable and to just ride on out. But to me, that's not living. Even in relationship, um, you know, you can be married 20, 30 years. And if you're not careful, it becomes just the routine. It becomes just the, all righty, okay, here we go again, you know. And before you know it, what has happened, you grow apart and you lose the fire. But if you're going to continue to keep that fire burning, you got to keep thinking outside the box. You got, okay, how do I put more wood on this fire? How do I create? How do we, where do we go? And so you got to constantly be thinking. And so, hey, y'all, again, God have not called us to get to a point where we have arrived. God is saying, I've come that you might have life and that you might have it more abundantly. So keep getting better. Keep making life sweeter and gooder all the way around. Amen.